Lecture 1: The Hero as Divinity, Odin, Paganism, Scandinavian Mythology. We've undertaken to discourse here for a little on great men, their manner of appearance in our world's business, how they have shaped themselves in the world's history, what ideas men formed of them, what work they did. On heroes, namely, and on their reception and performance, what I call hero worship and the heroic in human affairs. Too evidently, this is a large topic, deserving quite other treatment than we can expect to give it at present. A large topic, indeed an illimitable one, wide as universal history itself. For as I take it, universal history, the history of what man has accomplished in this world, is at bottom the history of the great men who have worked here. They were the leaders of men, those great ones, the modelers, patterns, and in a wide sense, creators of whatsoever in the general mass of men contrived to do or to attain. All things that we see standing accomplished in the world are properly the outer material result, the practical realization and embodiment of thoughts that dwell in the great men sent into the world, the soul of the whole world's history. It may justly be considered were the history of these. Too clearly, it is a topic we shall do no justice to in this place. One comfort is that great men taken up in any way are profitable company. We cannot look, however, imperfectly upon a great man without gaining something by him. He is the living great man he is the living light fountain, which is good and pleasant to be near, the light which enlightens, which has enlightened the darkness of the world, and this not as a kindling lamp only, but rather as a natural luminary shining by the gift of heaven, a flowing light fountain, as I say, of native original insight, of manhood and heroic nobleness, in which radiance all souls feel that it is well with them. On any terms whatsoever, you will not grudge to wander in such a neighborhood for a while. These 6 classes of heroes, chosen out of widely distant countries and epochs, and in mere external figures differing altogether, ought, if we look faithfully at them, to illustrate several things for us. Could we see them well, we should get a glimpse into the very marrow of the world's history. How happy could I but in any measure in such times as these make manifest to you the meanings of heroism, the divine relation, for I may well call it such, which at all times unites a great man to other men, and thus, as it were, not exhaust my subject, but so much as break ground on it. At all events, I must make the attempt. It is well said in every sense that a man's religion is the chief fact with regard to him. A man's or a nation of men's. By religion, I do not mean here the church creed which he professes, the article of faith which he will sign and in words or otherwise assert. Not this wholly, in many cases, not this at all. We see of men all kinds of professional creeds attain almost all degrees of worth or worthlessness under each of them. This is not what I call religion, this profession and assertion, which is often only a profession and assertion from the outwards of the man. From the mere argumentative region of him, if even so deep as that. But the thing a man does practically believe, and this is often enough without asserting it even himself, much less to others, the thing a man does practically lay to heart and know for certain concerning his vital relations to this mysterious universe and his duty and destiny there, that is in all cases the primary thing for him and creatively determines all the rest. That is his religion, or it may be his mere skepticism and no religion. The manner it is to which he feels himself to be spiritually related to the unseen world or no world. And I say, if you tell me what it is, if you tell me what that is, you tell me to a very great extent what the man is, what the kinds of things he will do. Of a man or of a nation, we inquire, therefore, first of all, what religion they had. Was it heathenism, plurality of gods, merely a sensuous representation of this mystery of life, and for chief recognized elements therein physical force? Was it Christianism, faith in an invisible, not as real only, but as the only reality, time, through every meanest moment of it, resting in eternity? Pagan empire of force displaced by a nobler supremacy than of holiness? Was it skepticism, uncertainty and inquiry, whether there was an unseen world or any mystery of life except a mad one? Doubt as to all this, or perhaps unbelief and flat denial? Answering of this question is giving us the soul of the history of the man or nation. The thought they had were the parent of the actions that they did. Their feelings were parents of their thoughts. It was the unseen and spiritual in them that determined the outward and the actual. Their religion, as I say, was the great fact about them. In these discourses, limited as we are, it will be good to direct our survey chiefly to that religious phasis of the matter. That once well known, all is known. We have chosen as our first hero in the series Odin, the central figure of Scandinavian paganism, an emblem to us of a most extensive province of things. Let us look for a little at the hero as divinity, the oldest primary form of heroism. Surely it seems a very strange looking thing, this paganism. Almost inconceivable to us these days. A bewildering, inextricable jungle of delusions, confusions, falsehoods, and absurdities, covering the whole field of life. A thing that fills us with astonishment, almost as if it were possible, with incredulity. For truly it is not easy to understand that sane men could ever calmly, with their eyes open, believe and live by such a set of doctrines. That men should have worshipped their poor fellow man as a god, and not him only, but stocks and stones and all manner of animate and inanimate objects, and fashioned for themselves such a distracted chaos of hallucinations by way of theory of the universe. All this looks like an incredible fable. Nevertheless, it is a clear fact that they did this. Such hideous, inextricable jungle of misworships, misbeliefs, men, made as we are, did actually hold by and live in home in. This is strange. Yes, we may pause in sorrow and silence over the depths of darkness that are in man, if we rejoice in the heights of purer vision he has attained to. Such things were and are in man, in all men, and in us too. Some spectators have a short way of accounting for the pagan religion. Mere quackery, priestcraft, and dupery, they say. No sane man ever did believe it, merely contrived to persuade other men not worthy of the sane to believe it. It will often be our duty to protest against this sort of hypothesis about men's doing in history. And I here on the very threshold protest against it in reference to paganism and to all other isms by which man has ever for a length of time striven to walk in the world. They've all had truth in them, or men would not have taken them up. Quackery and dupery do abound in religion, above all in the more advanced decaying stages of religion. They have fearfully abounded. But quackery was never the originating influence in such things. It was not the health and life of such things, but their disease, the sure precursor of their being about to die. Let us never forget this. It seems to me a most mournful hypothesis, that of quackery giving birth to any faith, even in savage men. Quackery gives birth to nothing, gives death to all things. We shall see not into the true heart of anything if we look merely at the quackeries of it. If we do not reject the quackeries altogether as mere diseases, corruptions, with which our and all men's sole duty is to have done with them, to sweep them out of our thoughts as out of our practice. Man everywhere is the born enemy of lies. I find grand laymanism itself to have a kind of truth in it. Read The candid, clear-sighted, and rather sceptical Mr. Turner's account of his embassy to that country and see. They have their beliefs, these poor Tibet people, that Providence sends down always an incarnation of himself into every generation. At bottom, some belief in a kind of pope. At bottom, still belief that there is a greatest man, that he is discoverable, that once discovered, we ought to treat him with an obedience which knows no bounds. This is the truth of grand lamism. The discoverability is the only error here. The Tibet priests have methods of their own for discovering what man is the greatest, fit to be supreme over them. Bad methods, but are they so much worse than our methods of understanding him to be always the eldest born from a certain genealogy? Alas, it is a difficult thing to find good methods for. We shall begin to have a chance of understanding paganism when we first admit that to its followers it was at one time earnestly true. Let us consider it very certain that men did believe in paganism, men with open eyes, sound senses, men made altogether like ourselves, that we, had we been there, should have believed in it. Ask now what paganism could have been. Another theory, somewhat more respectable, attributes such things to allegory. It was a play of poetic minds, say these theorists, a shadowing forth in allegorical fable, in personification and visual form, of what such poetic minds had known and felt of this universe, which agrees, add they, with the primary law of human nature, still everywhere observably at work, though in less important things, that what a man feels intensely, he struggles to speak out of him, to see represented before him in visual shape, and if with this kind of life and historical reality to it. Now, doubtless there is such a law, and it is one of the deepest in human nature. Neither need we doubt that it did operate fundamentally in this business. The hypothesis which ascribes paganism wholly or mostly to this agency, I call a little more respectable, but I cannot yet call it the true hypothesis. Think, would we believe and take with us as our life guidance an allegory, a poetic sport? Not sport, but earnest is what we should require. It is a most earnest thing to be alive in this world. To die is not sport for a man. Man's life never was a sport to him. It was a stern reality, altogether a serious matter to be alive. I find, therefore, that these allegory theorists are on the way towards truth in this matter. They have not reached it either. Pagan religion is indeed an allegory, a symbol of what men felt and knew about the universe, and all religions are symbols of that, altering always as that alters. But it seems to me that a radical perversion and even inversion of the business to put forwards that as the origin and moving cause, when it was rather the result and the termination. To get beautiful allegories, a perfect poetic symbol, was not the want of men, but to know what they were to believe about this universe, what course they were to steer in it, what in this life of theirs they had to hope and to fear, to do and to forbear doing. The Pilgrim's Progress is an allegory, and a beautiful, just, and serious one. But consider whether Bunyan's allegory could have preceded the faith it symbolizes. The faith had to already be there, standing believed by everybody, of which the allegory could then become a shadow. And with all its seriousness, we may say a sportful shadow, a mere play of fancy in comparison with that awful fact and scientific certainty which it poetically strives to emblem. The allegory is the product of the certainty and not the producer of it, not in Bunyan's nor in any other case. For paganism, therefore, we have still to inquire whence came that scientific certainty, the parent of such a bewildering heap of allegories, errors, and confusions. How was it? What was it? Surely It were a foolish attempt to pretend explaining, in this place or in any place, such a phenomenon as that far distant, distracted crowd imbroglio of paganism, more like a cloud field than a distant continent of firm land and facts. It is no longer a reality, yet it was one. We ought to understand that this seeming cloud field was once a reality, not poetic allegory, least of all that dupery and deception was the origin of it. Men, I say, never did believe idle songs, never risked their soul's life on allegories. Men in all times, especially in early earnest times, have had an instinct for detecting quacks, for detesting quacks. Let us try if, leaving out both the quack theory and the allegory one, and listening with affectionate attention to that far-off confused rumour of the pagan ages, we cannot ascertain so much as this at least: that there was a kind of fact at the heart of them, that they too were not mendacious and distracted, but in their own poor way true and sane. You remember that fancy of Plato's, of a man who had grown to maturity in some dark distance, and was brought on a sudden to the upper air to see the sun rise. What would his wonder be, his rapt astonishment at the sight that we daily witness with indifference? With the free, open sense of a child, yet with the ripe faculty of a man, his whole heart would be kindled by that sight. He would discern it well to be godlike. His soul would fall down in worship before it. Now, just such a childlike greatness was in the primitive nations. The first pagan thinker among rude men, the first man that began to think, was precisely this child man of Plato's. Simple, open as a child, yet with the depth and strength of a man. Nature had as yet no name to him. He had not yet united under a name the infinite variety of signs, sounds, shapes, and motions which we now collectively name universe, nature, or the like. And so with a name dismiss it from us. To the wild, deep-hearted man, all was yet new, not veiled under names or formulas. It stood naked, flashing in on him there. Beautiful, awful, unspeakable. Nature was to this man what to the thinker and prophet it forever is, preternatural. This green, flowery, rock-built earth, the trees, the mountains, rivers, many-sounding seas, that great deep sea of azure that swims overhead, the wind sweeping through it, the black cloud fashioning itself together, now pouring out fire, now hail and rain. What is it? Aye, what? At bottom, we do not yet know. We can never know at all. It is not by our superior insight that we escape the difficulty. It is by our superior levity, our inattention, our want of insight. It is by not thinking that we cease to wander at all. Hardened round us, encased wholly every nation we form, is a wrappage of traditions, hearsays, mere words. We call that fire of the black thundercloud electricity, and lecture learnedly about it, and grind the like of it out of glass and silk. But what is it? What made it? Whence comes it? Whither goes it? Science has done much for us, but it is a poor science that would hide from us the great deep sacred infinitude of nescience, whither we can never penetrate, on which science swims as a mere superficial film. This world, after all our science and sciences, is still a miracle, wonderful, inscrutable, magical, and more to whosoever will think of it. That great mystery of time, were there no other, the illimitable, silent, never-resting thing called time, rolling, rushing on, swift, silent, like an all-embracing ocean tide, on which we and all the universe swim like exhalations, like apparitions which are and then are not. This is forever, very literally, a miracle, a thing to strike us dumb, for we have no word to speak about it. This universe, ah me, what could the wild man know of it? And can we yet know? That it is a force, and a thousandfold complexity of forces, a force which is not we. That is all. It is not we. It is altogether different from us. Force. Force everywhere. Force. We ourselves, a mysterious force in the center of it. There is not a leaf rotting on the highway, but has force in it. How else could it rot? Nay, surely to the atheist thinker, if such a one were possible, it must be a miracles too. This huge, illimitable whirlwind of force which envelops us here, never resting whirlwind, high as immensity, old as eternity. What is it? God's creation, the religious people answer. It is the Almighty God's. Atheistic science babbles poorly of it, with scientific nomenclatures, experiments, and whatnots, as if it were a poor dead thing to be bottled up in Leyden jars and sold over counters. But the natural sense of man in all times, if he will honestly apply his sense, proclaims it to be a living thing. An unspeakable, godlike thing, towards which the best attitude for us, after never so much science, is awe, devout protestation and humility of soul, worship, if not in words, then in silence. But now I remark, Father, what in such a time as ours it requires a prophet or poet to teach us, namely, the stripping off of those poor, undevout wrappages, nomenclatures, and scientific hearsays. This the ancient's earnest soul, as yet unencumbered with these things, did for itself. The world which is now divine only to the gifted was then divine to whosoever would turn his eye upon it. He stood bare before it, face to face. All was godlike or God. Jean Paul still finds it so. The giant Jean Paul, who has power to escape out of hearsays, but there then were no hearsays. Canopus shining down over the desert with its blue diamond brightness, the wild blue spirit-like brightness, far brighter than we ever witness here, would pierce into the heart of the wild Ishmaelitist man, whom it was guiding through the solitary waste there. To his wild heart, with all feeling in it, with no speech for any feeling, it might seem a little eye, that Canopus, glancing out on him from the great, deep eternity, revealing the inner splendor to him. Cannot we understand how these men worshipped Canopus, became what we call Sabaeans, worshipping the stars? Such is to me the secret of all forms of paganism. Worship is transcendent wonder, wonder for which there is now no limit or measure. That is worship. To these primeval men, all things and everything they saw exist beside them were an emblem of the godlike, of some god. And look what perennial fiber of truth was in that. To us also, through every star, through every blade of grass, is not a God made visible? If we will open our minds and eyes, we do not worship in that way now, but it is reckoned still a merit, proof of what we call a poetic nature, that we recognize how every object has divine beauty in it, how every object still verily is a window through which we may look into the infinitude itself. He that can discern the loveliness of things, we call him poet, painter, man of genius, gifted, lovable. These poor Sabaeans did even what he does in their own fashion. They did it in what fashion soever was a merit, better than what the entirely stupid man did, what the horse and camel did, namely, nothing. But now, if all things whatsoever that we look upon are emblems to us of the highest God, I add that more so than any of them is man such an emblem. You have heard Saint Christopham celebrated in reference to the Shekinah, or Ark of Testimony, visible revelation of God even among the Hebrews. The true Shekinah is man. Yes, it is even so. This is no vain phrase. It is veritably so. The essence of our being, the mystery in us that calls itself I, what words we have for such things, is a breath of heaven. The highest being reveals himself in man. This body, these faculties, this life of ours, it is not all as a vesture for the unnamed. This body, these faculties, this life of ours, is it not all as a vesture for that unnamed? There is but one temple in the universe, says the devout Novalis, and that is the body of man. Nothing is holier shall that high form. Bending before men is a reverence done to this revelation in the flesh. We touch heaven when we lay our hand on a human body. This sounds much like a mere flourish of rhetoric, but it is not so. If well meditated, it will turn out to be a scientific fact, the expression in such words as can be had of the actual truth of the thing. We are the miracle of miracles, the great inscrutable mystery of God. We cannot understand it, we know not how to speak of it, but we may feel and know if we like that it is verily so. Well, these truths were once more readily felt than now. The young generations of the world, who had in them the freshness of young children, and yet the depth of earnest men, who did think that they had finished off all things in heaven and earth by merely giving them scientific names, but had to gaze direct at them there with awe and wonder. They felt better what of divinity is in man and nature. They, without being mad, could worship nature, and man more than anything else in nature. Worship that, as I said above, admire without limits, this in the full use of their faculties and with all sincerity of heart they could do. I consider hero worship to be the grand modifying element in that ancient system of thought. What I called the perplexed jungle of paganism sprang, as we may say, out of the many roots. Every admiration of star or natural object was a root or fibre of a root, but hero worship is the deepest root of all, the taproot from which, in a great degree, all the rest were nourished and grown. And now if worship even of a star had some meaning in it, how much more might that of a hero? Worship of a hero is transcendent admiration of a great man. I say great men are still admirable. I say there is at bottom nothing else admirable. No nobler feeling than this of admiration for one higher than himself dwells in the breast of man. It is to this hour, and at all hours, the vivifying influence in man's life. Religion, I find, stand upon it. Not paganism only, but far higher and truer religions. All religion hitherto known. Hero worship, heartfelt prostrate admiration, submission, burning, boundless, for a nobler, godlike form of man. Is not that the germ of Christianity itself? The greatest of all heroes is one, whom we do not name here. Let sacred silence meditate that sacred matter. You will find it the ultimate perfection of a principle extant throughout man's whole history on earth. Or, coming to lower, less speakable provinces, Is not all loyalty akin to religious faith also? Faith is loyalty to some inspired teacher, some spiritual hero, and what therefore is loyalty proper, the life breath of all society, but an effluence of hero worship, submissive admiration for the truly great. Society is founded on hero worship. All dignitaries' rank on which human assertions rest are what we may call a hierarchy, government of heroes, or a hierarchy, for it is sacred enough with all. The duke means ducks, leader. King is conning, canning, man that knows or cans. Society everywhere is some representation, not insupportably inaccurate, of a graduated worship of heroes. Reverence and obedience done to men, really great and wise, not insupportably inaccurate, I say. There are all as banknotes, these societal dignitaries, all representing gold, and several of them, alas, are always forged notes. We can do with some forged false notes, with a good many even, but not with all, or the most of them forged. No. There have to come revolutions then, cries of democracy, liberty, and equality, and I know not what. The notes being all false and no gold to be had for them, people take to crying in their despair that there is no gold, that there never was any. Gold! Hero worship is nevertheless as it always was and everywhere, and cannot cease till man himself ceases. I am well aware that in these days hero worship, the thing I call hero worship, professes to have gone out and finally ceased. This, for reasons which it will be worth some while to inquire into, is an age that, as it were, denies the existence of great men, denies the desirableness of great men, shows our critics a great man, a Luther, for example. They begin to what they call account for him, not to worship him, but to take the dimensions of him and bring him out to be a little kind of man. He was a creature of the time, they say. The time called him forth. The time did everything, he nothing, but what we call the little critic could have done. This seems to me but melancholy work. The time call forth? Alas, we have known times call loud enough for their great man, but not find him when they called. He was not there. Providence had not sent him. The time, calling its loudest, had to go down to confusion and wreck because he would not come when called. For if we think of it, no time need have gone to ruin could it have found a man great enough, a man wise and good enough, wisdom to truly discern what the time wanted, valor to lead it on down the right road thither. These are the salvation of any time. But I liken common languid times with their unbelief, distress, and perplexity, with their languid, doubting characters and embarrassed circumstances, impotently crumbling down into ever worse distress toward final ruin. All this I liken to dry, dead fuel waiting for the lightning out of heaven that should kindle it. The great man, with his free force direct out of God's hand, is the lightning. His word is the wise, healing word which all can believe in. All blazes round him now when he has once struck onto it and to the fire like his own. The dry mouldering sticks are thought to have called him forth. They did want him greatly. But as to calling him forth, these are critics of small vision, I think, who cry, "See, it is not the sticks that make the fire." No sadder proof can be given by a man of his own littleness than disbelief in great men. There is no sadder symptom of a generation than such general blindness to the spiritual lightning. With faith only in the heap of the barren dead fuel, it is the last consummation of unbelief. In all epochs of the world's history, we shall find the great man to have been the indispensable saviour of his epoch, the lightning without which the fuel never would have burned. The history of the world, I said already, was the biography of great men. Such small critics do what they can to promote unbelief and universal spiritual paralysis, but happily, they cannot always completely succeed. In all times, it is possible for a man to arise great enough to feel that they and their doctrines are chimeras and cobwebs. And what is notable, in no time whatever can they entirely eradicate out of living men's hearts a certain altogether peculiar reverence for great men. Genuine admiration, loyalty, adoration, however dim and perverted it may be. Hero worship endures forever, while man endures. Boswell venerates his Johnson, right truly even in the 18th century. The unbelieving French believe in their Voltaire and burst round him into very curious hero worship. In that last act of his life, when they stifle him under roses, it has always seemed to me extremely curious, this of Voltaire. Truly, if Christianity be the highest instance of hero worship, then we may find here a kind of Voltairism of the lowest. He whose life was that of a kind of Antichrist does again on this side exhibit a curious contrast. No people ever were so little prone to admire at all as those French of Voltaire. Persiflage was the character of their whole mind. Adoration had nowhere a place in it. Yet see, the old man of Ferney comes up to Paris, an old, tottering and infirm man of 84 years. They feel that he too is a kind of hero, that he has spent his life in opposing error and injustice, delivering calluses, unmasking hypocrites in high places. In short, that he too, though in a strange way, has fought like a valiant man. They feel withal that if persiflage be a great thing, there never was such a persifleur. He is the realized ideal of every one of them, the thing they are all wanting to be. Of all Frenchmen, the most French. He is properly their God, such God as they are fit for. Accordingly, all persons, from the Queen Antoinette to the Douane as the port of Denis, do they not worship him? People of quality disguise themselves as tavern waiters, the maître de poste, with the broad oath, his orders of postilion. Va bon train, thou art driving Monsieur de Voltaire. At Paris, his carriage is the nucleus of Comet, whose train fills the whole street. The ladies pluck a hair or two from his fur to keep him as a sacred relic. There was nothing highest, beautifulest, noblest in all France that did not feel this man to be higher, beautifuler, nobler. Yes, from Odin to English Samuel Johnson, from the divine founder of Christianity to the withered pontiff of encyclopedianism, in all times and places, the hero has been worshipped. It will ever be so. We all love great men, love, venerate, and bow down submissive before great men. Nay, can we honestly bow down to anything else? Does not every true man feel that he is himself made higher by doing reverence to what is really above him? No nobler or more blessed feeling dwells in man's hearts. And to me, it is a very cheering thing to consider that no skeptical logic or general triviality, insecurity, and aridity of any time and its influences can destroy this noble inborn loyalty and worship that is in man. In times of unbelief, which soon have to become times of revolution, much downrushing, sorrowful decay and ruin is visible to everybody. For myself in these days, I seem to see in this indestructibility of hero worship the everlasting adamant lower than which the confused wreck of revolutionary things cannot fall. For myself in these days, I seem to see in this indestructibility of hero worship the everlasting adamant lower than which the confused wreck of revolutionary things cannot fall. The confused wreck of things crumbling and even crashing and tumbling round us in these revolutionary ages will get down so far, but no further. It is an eternal cornerstone from which they can begin to build themselves up again. That man, in some sense or other, worships heroes. That we, all of us, reverence and must ever reference great men. This is to me the living rock amid all rushing down whatsoever, the one fixed point in modern revolutionary history, otherwise as if bottomless and shoreless. So much truth only under an ancient, obscure vesture, but the spirit of it still true do I find in the paganism of old nations. Nature is still divine, the revelation of the workings of God. The hero is still worshipable. This, under poor, cramped, incipient forms, is what all pagan religions have struggled as they could to set forth. I think Scandinavian paganism to us here is more interesting than any other. It is, for one thing, the latest. It continued in these regions of Europe till the 11th century. 800 years ago, the Norwegians were still worshippers of Odin. It's interesting also as to the creed of our fathers, the men whose blood still runs in our veins, whom doubtless we still resemble in many ways. Strange, they did believe that, while we believe so differently. Let us look a little at this poor Norse creed, for many reasons. We have tolerable means to do it, for there is another point of interest in these Scandinavian mythologies, that they have been preserved so well. In that strange island, Iceland, burst up, the geologists say, by fire from the bottom of the sea, a wild land of barrenness and lava, swallowed many months of every year in black tempests, yet with a wild, gleaming beauty in summertime, towering up there, stern and grim in the North Ocean, with its snow jocules, roaring geysters, sulphur pools, and horrid volcanic chasms, like the waste, chaotic battlefield of frost and fire, where of all places we least looked for literature or written memorials. The record of these things was written down. On the seaboard of this wild land is a rim of grassy country where cattle can subsist, and men of means of them, and of what the sea yields, and it seems they were poetic men, these, men who had deep thoughts in them, and uttered musically their thought. Much would have been lost had Iceland not been burst up from the sea, not been discovered by the Northmen. The old Norse poets were many of the native Icelands. Saemund, one of the early Christian priests there, who perhaps had a lingering fondness for paganism, collected certain of their old pagan songs, just about becoming obsolete then. Poems or chants of a mythic prophetic, mostly of all a religious character. This is what the North critics call the Elder or poetic Edda. Edda, a word of unknown etymology, is thought to signify ancestress. Snorri Sturluson, an Icelandic gentleman, an extremely notable personage, educated by this Saemund's grandson, took in hand next, near a century afterwards, to put together among several other books he wrote, a kind of prose synopsis of the whole of the mythology, elucidated by new fragments of traditional verse, a work constructed really with great ingenuity, native talent, what one might call unconscious art. Altogether a perspicuous, clear work, pleasant reading still. This is the younger or prose Edda. By these and the numerous other sagas, mostly Icelandic, with the commentaries, Icelandic or not, which go on zealously in the North to this day, it is possible to gain some direct insight even yet, and see that old Norse system of belief, as it were, face to face. Let us forget that it is erroneous religion. Let us look at it as old thought and try, if we cannot sympathize with it, somewhat. The primary characteristic of this Old North mythology I find to be impersonation of the visible workings of nature. Earnest, simple recognition of the workings of physical nature as a thing wholly miraculous, stupendous, and divine. What we now lecture as science, they wondered at and fell down in awe before as religion, the dark, hostile powers of nature. They figure themselves as Jontus, giants, huge, shaggy beings of a demonic character. Frost, fire, sea tempest, these are Jontans. The friendly powers again, as summer heat, the sun, are gods. The empire of this universe is divided between these two. They dwell apart in perennial, internecine feud. The gods dwell above in Asgard, the garden of the Asen, or divinities. Jotunheim, a distant, dark, chaotic land, is the home of the Jontans. Curious all this, and not idle or inane, for if we will look at the foundations of it, the power of fire or flame, for instance, which we designate by some trivial chemical name, thereby hiding it from ourselves and hiding the essential character of wonder that dwells in it, is with these Old Northmen Loki, a most swift, subtle demon of the brood of the Jontans. The savages of the Ladrones Islands, too, some say Spanish voyagers, thought fire, which they had never seen before, was a devil or god that bit you sharply when you touched it, and that lived upon dry wood. From us, too, no chemistry, if it had not stupidly to help it, would hide that flame is a wonder. What is flame? Frost, the Old Norse seer, discerns to be a monstrous hoary Jontan, the giant Thrym, Hrym, or Rime. The old word, near obsolete here, but still used in Scotland to signify hoarfrost. Rime was not then, as now, a dead chemical thing, but a living Jontum, or devil. The monstrous Jontum Rime drove home his horses at night, sat combing their manes, which horses were hail-clad, or fleet frost winds his cows. No, not his, but a kinsman's. The giant Hymir's cows are icebergs. This Hymir looks at rocks with his devil's eye, and they split in the glance of it. Thunder was not then mere electricity, vitreous or resinous. It was the god Donner, thunder, or Thor. God also of beneficent summer heat. The thunder was his wrath. The gatherings of the black clouds is the drawing down of Thor's angry brows. The firebolts bursting out of heaven is the all-rending hammer flung from the hand of Thor as he urges his loud chariot over the mountain tops. That is the pearl, the wrathful he blows in his red beard. That is the rustling storm blast before the thunder begins. Balder again, the white god, the beautiful, the just, and the benignant, whom the early Christian missionaries found to resemble Christ, is the sun, the beautifulest of visible things, wondrous too, and divine still among all our astronomies and almanacs. But perhaps the notablest god we hear tell of is one whom Grimm, the German etymologist, finds trace. The god Wunsch, or Vish. The god Vish, who could give us all that we've wished. Is not this the sincerest and yet rudest voice in the spirit of man, the rudest ideal that man ever formed, which still shows itself in the latest forms of our spiritual culture? Higher considerations have to teach us that God Vish is not the one true God. Of the other gods, or Jotuns, I will mention only for etymology's sake that sea tempest is the Jotun Aegir, a very dangerous Jotun. And now to this day, on our River Trent, as I learn, the Nottingham bargemen, wherein the river is in a certain flooded state, a kind of backwater or eddying swirl it has, very dangerous, they call it eager, and they cry out, "Have a care, there is the eager coming." Curious, that old word surviving like the peak of a submerged world. The oldest Nottingham bargemen had believed in the god Aegir. Indeed, our English blood too, in a good part, is Danish. Norse, or rather at bottom, Danish and Norse and Saxon have no distinction, except a superficial one, as of heathen and Christian or the like. But all over our island, we are mingled largely with Danes proper, from the incessant invasion there were. And this, of course, in a greater proportion along the east coast, and greatest of all, as I find, in the North Country. From the Humber upward, all over Scotland, the speech of the common people is still in a singular degree Icelandic. Its Germanism has still a peculiar Norse tinge. They too are Normans, Northmen, if there be any great beauty. Of the chief god Odin we shall speak by and by. Mark at present so much what the essence of the Scandinavian, and indeed of all paganism, is a recognition of the forces of nature as godlike, stupendous personal agencies as gods and demons, not inconceivable to us. It is the infant thought of man opening himself with awe and wonder on this ever stupendous universe. To me, there is in the Norse system something very genuine, very great and manlike. A broad simplicity, rusticity, so very different from the light gracefulness of the old Greek paganism, distinguishes this Scandinavian system. It is thought, the genuine thought of the deep, rude, earnest minds, fairly opened to the things about them. A face-to-face and heart-to-heart introspection of the things. The first characteristic of all good thought in all times. Not graceful lightness, half sport, as in the Greek paganism, a certain homely truthfulness and a rustic strength, a great rude sincerity discloses itself here. It is strange after our beautiful Apollo statues and clear smiling Methusas to come down on the North gods brewing ale and hold their feast with Aegir, the sea Jotun, and sending out Thor to get the cauldron for them in the Jotun country. Thor, after many adventures, clapping the pot on his head like a huge hat and walking off with it, quite lost in it, the ears of the pot reaching down to his heels, a kind of vacant hugeness, large, awkward giantness, characterizes that North system. The Norse system, enormous force as yet altogether untutored, stalking helplessly with large, uncertain strides. Consider only their primary mythos of the creation. The gods having got the giant Ymir slain, a giant made by warm wind, and much confused work out of the conflict by frost and fire, determined on constructing a world with him. His blood made the sea, his flesh was the land, the rocks his bones. Of his eyebrows they formed Asgard, their god's dwelling. His skull was the great blue vault of immensity, and the brains of it became the clouds. What a hyper Brobdingnagian business. What a hyper Brobdingnagian business. Untamed thought, great, giant-like, enormous, to be tamed in due time into the compound greatness, not giant-like, but godlike, and stronger than gianthood. Of the Shakespeares, the Goethe's. Spiritually as well as bodily, these men too are our progenitors. I like, too, that the representation they have of the tree Yggdrasil. All life is figured by them as a tree. Yggdrasil, the ash tree of existence, has its roots deep down in the kingdom of Hela, or death. Its trunk reaches up, heaven high, and spreads its bough over the whole universe. It is the tree of existence. At the foot of it, in the Death Kingdom, sit three Nornas, fates. The past, present, future, watering its roots from the sacred well. Its boughs, with their budding and disleafing, events, things suffered, things done, catastrophes, stretch forth through all land and times. Is not every leaf of it a biography, every fibre there an act or word? Its boughs are histories of nations. The rustle of it is the noise of human existence, onwards from old. It grows there, the breath of human passion rustling through it, or storm-tossed, the storm winds howling through it like the voice of all the gods. It is Yggdrasil, the tree of existence. It is the past, the present, and the future. What was done, what is doing, and what will be done. The infinitive conjugation of the verb to do, considering how human things circulate, each inextricably in communion with all, how the world I speak to you today is borrowed not from Ulfilia, the Mosgoth, only, but from all men, since the first man began to speak. I find no similitude so true as this of a tree. Beautiful, altogether beautiful and great, the machine of the universe. Alas, but do think of that in contrast. Well, it is strange enough, this old view, the Old Norse view of nature, different enough from what we believe of nature, whence it specially came, one would not like to be compelled very minutely. One thing we might say, it came from the first thoughts of Norsemen, from the thought above all of the first Norseman who had an original power of thinking. The first Norse man of genius, as we shall call him. Innumerable men had passed by across this universe with a dumb, vague wonder, such as the very animals may feel, or with a painful, fruitless, inquiring wonder, such as men only feel, till the great thinker came, the original man, the seer who shaped spoken thought and awaked the slumbering capabilities of all into thought. It is ever the way with the thinker, the spiritual hero. What he says, all men were not far from saying, were longing to say. The thoughts of all start up from painful, enchanted sleep round his thought, answering to it. Yes, even so, joyful to men as the dawning of day from night, is it not indeed the awakening for them from no being into being, from death into life? We still honour such a man, call him a poet, genius, and so forth. But to these wild men, he was a very magician, a worker of miraculous, unexpected blessings for them, a prophet, a god. Thought once awakened does not again slumber, unfolds itself into a system of thought, grows in man after man, generation after generation, till its full stature is reached, and such a system of thought can grow no further, but it must give way to another. For the Norse people, the man now named Odin and chief Norse god, we fancy, was such a man, a teacher and a captive of soul, a captain of soul and of body, a hero of worth immeasurable, admiration for whom, transcending the known bounds, became adoration. Has he not the power of articulate thinking, and many other powers as yet miraculous? So with boundless gratitude would the rude Norse heart feel. Has he not solved for them the Sphinx enigma of this universe, given assurance to them of their own destiny there? By him they know now what they have to do here, what to look for in the hereafter. Existence itself has become articulate, melodious by him. He first has made life alive. What we may call Odin, the origin of Norse mythology, Odin, or whatever the name of the first Norse thinker bore while he was a man among men, his view of the universe, once promulgated, a like view starts into being in all minds, grows, keeps ever growing, while it continues credible there. In all minds it lay written, but invisibly, as in sympathetic ink. At his word, it starts into visibility in all. Nay, in every epoch of the world, the great event, parent of all others, is it not the arrival of the thinker into the world? One other thing we must not forget, it will explain a little the confusion of these Norse Eddas. They are not one coherent system of thought, but properly the summation of several successive systems. All of this in the North belief, which is flung out for us in one level of distance in the Edda, like a picture painted on the same canvas, does not stand at all so in the reality. It stands rather at all in the manner of distances and depths of successive generations since the belief first began. All Scandinavian thinkers since the first of them contributed to that Scandinavian system of thought in ever new elaboration and addition. It is the combined work of them all, what history it had, how it changed from shape to shape by one thinker's contribution after another, till it got to the full final shape we see under it in Ida. No man will now ever know its council of Trebizond, councils of Trent, Athanasius, Dante, Luther's, are sunk in the echo into the dark night. Only that it had such a history, we can all know. Wheresoever a thinker appeared, there in the thing he thought was the contribution, accession, a change or revolution made. Alas, the grandest revelation of all, the one made by the man Odin himself, is not this too sunk for us like the rest? Of Odin, what history? Strange rather to reflect that he had history. That this Odin in his wild Norse vesture, with his wild beauty, his eyes and his beard and his rude Norse speech and ways, he was a man like us, with our sorrows, joys, with our limbs, features, intrinsically all one as we, and did such a work. But the work, much of it, has perished. The worker, all to the name Wednesday, men will say tomorrow, Odin's Day. If Odin there exists no history, no documents of it, no guess about it that is worth repeating.